The Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome to the Attleboro School Committee meeting of Monday, December 9th, 2019. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. And tonight we're going to start with a very special recognition and award to what has been a long-standing supporter and partner of the Attleboro Public Schools, the Rebecca Lynn Whitefield Foundation. We have a representative, Jim Hardy, from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees here as well to present the award. And at this time I'd like to ask Mike Whitefield and the members of the foundation to come forward, and we will, as well as Mr. Hardy. So, as everyone's moving into place, I'll just say the school committee was proud to nominate, and I can't take the credit for it, as Ms. Scales really was a ringleader in this, in nominating the Whitefield Foundation as the Outstanding School Partner Award nominee for Attleboro Public Schools for all the work they've done in the last many years, supporting the schools, raising funds, donating money and items in kind to the schools, and really pushing forward the mission and the mission of the Attleboro Public Schools. They've been really a part. We couldn't be where we are right now without the support that they've given us. So, so happy that the Mass Association of School Committees has agreed with our request to honor them for their support. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hardy from MASC to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Hardy. I'm a field director with the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. It is my honor to be here tonight representing the Massachusetts Association of School Committees Board of Directors to be present for the presentation of the Outstanding School Partner Award to the Rebecca Lynn Whitefield Foundation. My apologies. I've been practicing on it.
You're fine.
Just as an overview of what the award is, the guidelines for the Outstanding School Partner Award recognizes a corporate or a nonprofit entity who, through their contribution to the public schools of an individual community, region, or at large, have demonstrated support for public education. The contribution may be in any form, including financial, programmatic, or in kind. It may represent a single or multi-year support, provided that it is ongoing during the year the nomination is made. The MASC Board of Directors may designate one individual or one corporate or nonprofit agency as award winners for the year. From the nomination form, I have a brief description I'd like to read for you. Born out of tragedy, the Rebecca Lynn Whitefield Foundation became a positive influence to the youth of the greater Attleboro area. Becky was an active member of her school and community. Others here tonight can speak from a personal perspective of the life Becky led. I would like to focus on the contributions the foundation bearing her name have made that have had such a positive impact on the lives of the youth of Attleboro. Over the past several years, the fundraising activities of the foundation have allowed it to make a monetary or in-kind contributions, as well as scholarships to attend several area high schools in excess of $500,000. In addition to the monetary and in-kind contributions, members of the foundation have volunteered their time in helping with initiatives like the Attleboro Community Leaf Rake, where groups spend a weekend offering to rake the yards of seniors and veterans in the area who need assistance. Some other recent contributions include countless books donated to the library and the school libraries in honor of Becky, and a $4,000 donation to the Attleboro Public Schools for purchasing green screen technology for the schools to enhance project-based education. On behalf of the MASC Board of Directors, I am pleased to present to the Rebecca Lynn Whitefield Foundation the Outstanding School Partner Award for 2019.
So thank you very much, and again, thank you to the Whitefield Foundation, Mike, and all of you for everything that you do. There is, more importantly, more impressively, a plaque coming for the foundation, but with all things like that, they take time to put them together. But we do have a certificate of accommodation from the school committee that I'll just read right now and happily give to you, which just says, Massachusetts Association of School Committees and the Attleboro School Committee are honored to recognize the Rebecca Lynn Whitefield Foundation for your support, commitment, leadership, and sustained efforts to enhance the educational opportunities of the students of the Attleboro Public Schools. Signed, Stephen K. Withers Jr., Chairman, December 9th, 2019.
You don't have to say,
Yeah.
you don't have to say, it. I don't want to. I think just to,
Thank you very much.
you're very welcome.
Much appreciated.
Thank you.
from all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, next on the agenda tonight, we have our Student Advisory Council update, and for that, I'll turn it over to Eleanor.
All right, so first we have our cheer team who placed second in the state on November 24th. That was 2 weekends ago. And on Friday and Saturday we had our drama club perform She Talks to Monsters, and it was fantastic. Crowd loved it. They all loved it. I think Mr. Rooney, no, he's not here. No, I'm pointing. Mr. Rooney attended. He had fun. We had the Holiday Happenings Parade, and that was also pretty fun. And on Thanksgiving, the football team brought home the trophy. I think it's called Hilda. Is that what it's called? Yes. They beat North after it's been a while, hasn't it? I think.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I would say we beat North every day, but
All right, so not just for the elementary schools, just happens to be on this slide. We have holiday break coming up on the 20th. For the middle schools, we have parent-teacher conferences on Wednesday in the afternoon and on Thursday in the evening. Did that go? Yes. All right. On Saturday, we have the craft fair in the B1 cafeteria hosted by our cheerleaders. It's a $1 admission, and it's open all day, not all day, from 10 to 3. It's a good way to support the school. And the holiday concert is on Thursday the 19th at 7. That's not this Thursday, it's next Thursday. Come support our band. Oh, well, I missed one. We have our Pride Pouch Drive, there we go, to benefit Edward Tedesco on Christmas Day. And the students at Attleboro were collecting things like toothbrushes, hats, gloves, unused socks, other razors, shampoo, things like that. And it's we're turning it into a competition because kids are competitive. And our A blocks are A block is our first period of the day. We're bringing in things, and the A block with the most goods donated gets a prize at the end. I think it's a Dunkin' Donuts breakfast, and this is a really good cause. Helps people have that Christmas dinner that they should have. Yeah, that's all. If you have the community can donate goods at the principal's office. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
It's really fast today.
Next, we have our business agenda, and for that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent, Mr. Sawyer.
thank you, Chairman. Couple brief updates before we get to tonight's business, which is the FY21 budget development presentation. First, I just wanted to comment on our favorite topic, which is snow. As I mentioned in Friday's update, it's that season again. It seems to have come a little bit early this year, and if you've been paying attention to the forecast, we're staring down another snow event Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. I just briefly, for anyone listening at home, I just wanted to reiterate that we have a academic calendar. We plan out 180 days of school each year, and we do everything in our power to have school on those 180 days. People plan their lives around that calendar. They make life decisions based on when we say we're going to be in school and when we say we're not going to be in school. And so we feel like we have a real responsibility to be here on those 180 days. And if that means coming in late with a delay or leaving early with a dismissal helps us to live by that calendar, that's one of the things that we try to do. That being said, when we feel like conditions are not safe or that don't allow us to safely operate, then we have to cancel school. And that was the case on Tuesday. It didn't seem like much of a dramatic event. We've certainly faced worse, but just to kind of go over how complicated these decisions are, on Tuesday, it was the combination of how heavy and wet the snow was and the timing of it that just did not make preparing our grounds for the arrival of students a possibility. In fact, like City Hall, we had to keep all employees at home that day because we were not able to be ready to receive anybody. And so even though 4 inches really wasn't dramatic, just again, the kind of snow and when it came made a difference. I mean, sometimes more inches of powdery snow are easier to deal with. So as we face Wednesday's decision that, hopefully things turn out better. It's still enough time between now and then that perhaps we won't have to worry about it. Again, we are facing wet snow at an early, that's that 6 o'clock hour. We'll have to make a decision based on our best understanding of the forecast. The only other thing I wanted to say is that where we think that waiting will make a difference in the outcome, we sometimes will wait till the morning to make the decision, but more and more we try to make that decision the night before because I do think that it makes a big difference for a lot of families to know ahead, the evening ahead, and to be able to make the arrangements. Because when we have to cancel or do a delay, a lot of people are left scrambling to accommodate that. So whenever we can, we're going to make that decision the night before. There will be times that the forecast is not reliable enough. And that's one of the interesting things, that the data that we get from the National Weather Service, they tell us how reliable they feel the forecast is. And sometimes they say, we're confident in what we're telling you. And other times they admit there's too much variability and that they're not confident. So that factors into whether or not we decide to call it the night before, because the thing I have nightmares about when we call it the night before is that I wake up the next morning and that it's sunny and there's no snow out there. So can't promise myself that it won't ever happen, but when we feel confident that that we are facing the circumstances that we're fearing, we will make those calls the night before to give people that notice. A couple other facilities-related issues. We are moving forward with our plans to replace the roofs at Brennan and Wamsutta. We have that estimate in, and we're working with the city to take the next steps, which would involve hiring an OPM for those projects. I also want to let you know that our work on shoring up the Wi-Fi at the high school continues. We're working with a consultant to figure out exactly what those issues are, and it turns out that it's a series of things, both in terms of the infrastructure of a building that we're not going to invest in, and that's part of the problem, that we don't have the proper infrastructure, but there are other factors like interference from other networks that we don't control that we're learning are part of the problem, and then also just the way the building is configured. Cement block doesn't necessarily accommodate Wi-Fi. So we are working hard to try to figure out what's the best we can do to make the most of our Wi-Fi at the high school, and that's an ongoing project. In terms of the new high school project, we have two important benchmarks this week. One, we are moving a gas meter off of the sort of over by the pool entrance to the other side of the pool towards CTE, and that will allow for some important work to go on in that corner of the new building, which is delayed until that meter is moved. I guess can't do the work until that thing is out of the way. So that finally is being done this week. And the other is that the sewer pump that was necessitated by all the enabling work done for Rathman Willard Drive is being turned over the city and turned on and hooked up. So that's a real sign of all the progress that's been made on the project up to date. My only other piece of news for you is that the DESI district review that you've heard about is underway. They arrived early this morning and met with the administration to kick off their proceedings, and they spent the day in the district today, and they'll be doing so for the next 3 days, and we'll be hearing a little bit about where they landed on their way out the door on Thursday, and then they told us today that they are hopeful that we'll be seeing a draft of their report in March. At this time, I'd like to call up Mr. Furtado to join us to talk about the budget. Mark, if you could grab the clicker. All right, so FY21. Our goals for this evening. We're going to go over what the goals are. We're going to talk a little bit about FY20. We'll talk about FY21. We'll set our priorities, and then we'll hopefully wrap the whole thing up in a way that leaves you with a strong sense of what we just did. All right, so what are we trying to accomplish? Our goals for today's presentation, we want to go over the APS budget process and review, as we do annually, why we do it this way. We want to assess where we are with FY20. We want to set meaningful projections for FY21. And we want to set our priorities for the process in developing FY21. So why do we do it this way? First and foremost, we need to establish estimates so that we can have a strong understanding of what we're currently doing will cost us for next year, and that sets the frame for how we think about all the other decisions around the budget. We need to set priorities so that as we go through the budget process, we don't let the realities that we face and the process itself drive us away from what we're there to do. So by being clear about what we're trying to accomplish, that gives us a check upon our work to make sure that we accomplish what we need to accomplish, and that we don't let having a budget get in the way of having the best budget that we can. We need to anticipate opportunities to close the funding gap, right? So, as we talk about all the time, we have a significant gap between what we think of as adequate funding and what we currently have access to. And so by engaging in this process, we can look for opportunities to, through this process, improve things for the district, regardless of what our funding levels are. And then we also want to strategically use budgeting to improve educational outcomes for students. So this is our policy around the process, and as you're aware, we're here in December, which is that last moment before we really get into that budget development, where we present our estimates as the start of the process, so that we don't let the numbers that come out traditionally at the end of January be the starting place, that we've already have a sense of what to expect in terms of our costs, and that we already know what we're trying to accomplish, so that that's part of the process, not the start of the process. All right, so to discuss FY20 and 21, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Furtado.
Thank you. So for FY20, the Finance Subcommittee, has been meeting monthly, and we have gone over the budget in detail. And The number you see, 74,668,000, is our net school spending number. It does not include transportation. It's the net school spending portion of the budget, and we have discussed at finance some of the challenges we're facing this year, particularly with healthcare. We feel right now confident that the small deficits in the salary lines are gonna work themselves out through the year. But the healthcare issue is a concern, and the other one is, as it always is any significant changes in the wrong direction in special education tuitions. We've had some of that activity already this year. We get notices pretty regularly, 1 or 2 a month, on changes. And again, what you're looking for is direction. Our direction so far this year has not been good. And we're hoping it kind of settles down, or else that could rear its head again in the current year. In regard to tuitions, we have received notice of move-ins. Now again, there's a timing issue with students who move into districts, and we're in the window right now where we're not liable in the current year. However, we have students who have moved in who will, as of July 1st, cost us something around $800,000. One student alone is half of that. So, we've already got a concern for 21 in regard to special needs tuitions, and that is, just a base tuition number. That does not include any increases as of July 1 for tuition rates across all of our students. So next year, as the committee knows, we're going into contract negotiations. So it's pegging next year is a real challenge, both in terms of understanding where we'll be and where contracts will be. So we've made a series of assumptions for 21. We've assumed a overall 3% increase in our AEA membership costs. For paraprofessionals, it's 4%, and that's because of the construction of their wage scale, which is different than the rest of the unions in the district and costs more.
What do you mean by that?
So the average cost of steps, so if nobody got across the board increase at all and just took their steps, that average on the para wage scale is a point higher than everybody else. Clerical, also 3%, maintenance custodial 3%, individual contracts in the district 2.5%, and then health insurance. We received a formal invoice for FY21 retiree benefits that reflected an 8% increase. So we used that as the assumption for health costs for next year. Taking all that into account, the FY21 net school spending number that corresponds to the $74 million I showed you with the pie chart is $79,193,000, which represents a 6% increase over the current number. If you take what we know right now about out of district tuitions and take out that 8% for health insurance, our number drops down to $76,773,627, and that represents a 2.8% increase overall. So the point of this is structurally, right, we have committed to and have worked toward living in a 3% world, which this slide would suggest we have achieved. We don't control out-of-district tuitions, and we certainly don't control healthcare costs. So if you take the uncontrolled aspect of our budget away, the things that we can impact and have impacted have met their target.
Mr. Geddes?
So if you may have actually just answered my question, but essentially where you're saying all things static from FY20, we'd be looking at a 2.8% budget increase.
Yes.
It's the
other stuff that is bumping it up to a full 6%.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then, regarding the recently changed state funding formula, there's a lot of hope and expectation out there regarding what kind of funding we're going to see. And there's no reason to not have that hope or expectation. However, there's nobody who can tell us right now what the formula results in for the city of Attleboro and for the Attleboro Public Schools. So we're just being a little cautious. There's been 3 so far formal tables created. One by DESE early on in October, one by the Massachusetts Teachers Retirement, and then a third one that was informally put out by DESE Finance. 3 different numbers. But so there's no formal data to rely on right now to understand the impact. So I would suggest we be cautious and wait and see what the actual number is, and see how that will impact our needs for FY21.
And to discuss our budget priorities, I'll turn it over to
So, when we first created the Envisioning 2020 strategic plan, we created our district learning priorities, and they haven't changed. And so it continues to be providing our students with engaging learning experiences, making sure that all of those experiences provide hands-on opportunities for our students. Infusion of technology, you've seen that as a priority with our one-to-one program and other programs like ST Math. Personalization of learning programs, that's evidenced through our adoption of Naviance and support for students with their post-secondary career opportunities and endeavors. Experiential learning, we see that when we're creating opportunities for students to partner with the community and outside resources. And then finally, our student exit outcomes, which continue to be a source of us, having very high expectations for our students that cross our stage at graduation. We want them to be critical thinkers, problem solvers, collaborators, and be able to clearly communicate with each other. So our goals are directly tied to classroom size and staffing. We want to make sure that we increase our classroom staff to provide an appropriate class size and also to provide more choice in our scheduling opportunities. Our students' social emotional learning and behavioral needs continue to be a priority for us. And also we need to think about ways that we can support our ELL population as well as our special education students and our struggling students on a day-to-day basis that need support that don't fall into either one of those categories. Another goal that we have to support is the instructional technology. We continue to have more technology in the hands of our students, and we want to be able to provide our teachers with professional development to know how to adequately use those resources, and then to support the implementation of our ELA curriculum with professional development and resources for that as well. So we surveyed the staff through the Operations and Infrastructure Council, and with no surprise, our first budget priority is staff. Specifically, we're looking at core subjects in the middle school and support services and elementary and middle school scheduling.
Ms. Regan?
Yes.
I'm going to assume I'm correct given the priority, but my recollection is that in hiring back jobs that have been lost, the focus has been on elementary and the high school levels, and middle school has been the one that has had less focus so far. Is that accurate? So I assume that's why that's the focus now?
Middle school is at the top of the list. Yes. For budget priority number 2, that is inclusive practices. So staying with the theme on personnel, we do need more support personnel designated for our special populations, including special education and ELL, as well as materials and curriculum support to guide their instruction, and then professional development for educators to support social emotional learning, ELL, special education, and then, continue to support struggling students. And then our third priority here is focusing on instructional technology and the ELA curriculum, as noted before. Continuing to purchase devices for all students in grades 5 and 9, that is a priority. And then focusing on the professional development for our teachers so that they can appropriately implement and use those resources on a day-to-day basis for all of our students to be successful.
All right, so let's try to see if we can make sense of all this. I think a significant takeaway is that we continue to rein in costs to provide a sustainable budget context for this district. Of the things that we control, we are delivering a 2.8% increase for level services. So what we're doing this year, among the things that we have control over, the things that we take seriously as our responsibility to make every dollar count, we're able to roll that back next year at a 2.8% increase. And that's been a lot of work over years to get us to a place where we can deliver that. That being said, the second takeaway is, just like last year, out-of-district tuitions and health insurance continue to be the two things that we have no control over that drive up our costs to something that concerns us. My third point would be that we are optimistic that the Student Opportunity Act will provide us with the opportunity to actually make some progress towards our funding deficit and be able to actually deliver on some of these priorities. But the fourth point, which is an important one, is that, our fear is that some of the impact of those dollars will be eaten up by covering those costs that we do not control. So, when our costs are above that 3% mark, every dollar above that is dollars that we should be spending on getting more staff, that instead we have to pay for these costs that, as I've said, we don't really control.
Mr. Domenici?
Yes, so I have a question about the 8% estimation for increased healthcare costs. Where does that stand? Like over the last 2, 3, 5 budget years? Is that an anomaly, or is that the norm for that kind of increase?
It has not been the norm in recent history, and it has been sort of in the neighborhood of the starting place. Last year they opened up and told us it was 11 to start. We actually budgeted 7, and it turned out to be 4, I think, for the year. So it's a process like anything else. The unions have a role in kind of expressing their concerns with those kinds of increases. The city is self-insured, so the performance of the trust is vital to what they're capable of doing and what they're not capable of doing. There are historic surpluses in years past, and there's a very rigid set of rules that apply to how you use those surpluses, because there's still outstanding liabilities from those years that kind of tie you up a little bit in terms of what you can do. Mm-hmm. So all of those things go into trying to establish a new rate. And like everything else in life, you can be more aggressive or less aggressive on those fronts, depending on what the immediate urgency is. The reason we landed on 8 for the estimate is because, again, we had an actual invoice for FY21 retiree benefits that was 8% up. So I'm speculating from that's where they think that's the neighborhood they're gonna kind of open up with and see where it goes.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out, like, if there was, certain predictive indicators, like, over the years that kind of keep that number.
I would just add, and please, Mr. Furtado, correct me if I'm wrong, my perception of this is that, in terms of what we've lived budgetarily, that's high
Yeah.
over the last couple of years. But I don't think it's that far off in terms of what the actual growth and the cost is. It's just that through some accounting maneuvers that Mr. Furtado described, the city has been able to limit the impact of those increases to a number lower than that. And we're hopeful that through a process we'll land someplace better than 8% this year too, but at this stage it would be premature to assume that.
There was years in the past where there were prior year surpluses that were
Yes.
used, right, to reduce the impact.
Right.
if I
So
remember
the
correctly.
cost does go up by that much, but
Right.
we don't pay that much, right? Exactly.
Mr. Quinn?
And then also correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Fidel, a lot of it depends on the actual usage, right? So,
Right.
unforeseen events amongst not just unfortunate events to members of this community, but also the city community can
Right.
play with that number and spike it. It's, what is it, about like a 70-something% loss rate? What is the number we try to stay under in order to prevent increases?
Well, they have insurance for those those
Yep.
years where it pops, stop loss insurance, and yeah, a 70% payout is starting to push where you want to be, and again, within the context of all of that, they have opportunities to renegotiate some of those insurances and provisions within the trust to again reduce cost and lower some of the pressure. But I personally don't know where it stands this year in terms of utilization and cost, and we're not even halfway through yet. So, yeah, a lot can happen if you have a couple of catastrophic situations in the second half of the year. That number can change dramatically.
Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the additional funding for the Student Opportunity Act, is that going to be part of the budget? Is that the expectation, or will it be separate from the budget?
No, the Student Opportunity Act is a reconfiguration of the way they calculate Chapter 70.
Okay.
So that'll be our budget.
Okay. So we know that we're going to get additional funding. Do we have a timeline of when we expect we should know how much that'll actually be?
Well, again, it's a legislative change. So when the governor announces his budget, which is certainly going to come out in January, I would guess more to the middle rather than the earlier January. Those calculations will be part of his.
Yeah, Commissioner Riley identified January as the time that we should expect them.
So really, the way we should look at it, if I understand it correctly, is if we take our level funding, it'll just be additional to that, correct? So whatever the additional funding is, will it shift it?
I think that prior to the passage of the legislation, whatever our Chapter 70 expectation would be, which would primarily be driven by enrollment. So when they announced the foundation enrollment under the old formula, we'd have a good sense of where the Chapter 70 funding would be. And then the net school spending, you take net school spending, you subtract Chapter 70, and that's the city contribution.
Right.
So we would have a good sense. Right now, we don't know what we're going to get for each student. So that's going to drive an increase in Chapter 70. And again, depending on how they phase it in, it could be a little, it could be a lot. Attleboro, again, structurally is in a condition that's going to benefit more than most from the changes.
And I mean, if you think of past years, we haven't received level service funding in as long as I can remember. So, as far as it being on top, I would think it would be more towards getting us towards. I mean, that's not what we'll argue for, and not what the schools needs, but it'll get us towards actually reaching level services, most likely, and maybe getting us a little bit beyond, but not on top of that number.
Right. I guess
That's not the hope, but I think realistically speaking, that's what.
I guess the reason I bring it up is the thing that I would hate to say. I know that right now we get, $1 million or whatever, 1.5, whatever it is on top of the lowest
From the
level.
city.
From the city.
Yeah.
I would hate to see somehow or another this not be additional funding, but compensate somehow?
No, no. No, I think that the city's contribution, the calculation of the city's contribution will remain constant. So I don't think the city's going to get walloped by this, but it certainly will not decrease their requirement.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Nor the requirement, nor what we, I think, as a committee and district expect them to provide over the minimum. You know, this is additional funding from the state and potentially some requirements, but it's not impacting what, you know,
We expect
what we
more.
expect to receive from them above what.
We're back into a condition, again, to the superintendent's point, right now, we're back into a condition where we're very, very modestly above net school spending, and, we're somewhere in the, bottom quarter, bottom 10% of districts in the district, in the state, in terms of contribution, yeah.
So, one of the reasons for this presentation is that the numbers that were set on this slide will really help us to understand immediately where we stand when we see that number in January. So, every dollar over the $79 million number is a dollar that we're going to be able to, use to close the gap, that $10.5 million. Every dollar between the 76 and the 79. Is a problem, and anything below 76 is a serious problem.
Well, is the idea, though, that your net school spending estimate here is based on the variables you know today. But the Student Opportunity Act, I think the goal is to raise what net school spending is.
Yes.
So the funding that comes in from the state will also exponentially increase what net school spending now becomes.
Yes.
So the city will still have their responsibility, because I had a lot of folks ask that too. Well, like, if the state kicks in more, does that mean the city? I'm like, no. The net school spending doesn't stay constant. It will also rise with what the funding increase will be.
Correct.
Yeah, which is why in this transition year especially, those numbers are so important to us as a measure of whether we're really making progress or not.
So the idea would be at some point in time, like net school spending would really be sufficient.
Yeah.
If the funding were to truly
So-
do what we would hope it would
So
do.
just to clarify, based on how Chapter 70 has gone previously, that $76.7 million, which represents a 2.8% increase, is more of an increase than we've been getting from Chapter 70, right? So if we were to get, say, $77 million in Chapter 70 this year, that would be an increase in Chapter 70 funds from the state's perspective. They would be telling us, look, we're increasing how much money you have. But then we would look at it and say, yes, that's an increase, but we're still short. We still have a problem, right? So I think that's why that these numbers are so important to have a sense of ahead of time.
Mr. Geddes?
So, to the point, the last bullet on the last screen talked about how, excuse me, some of those out of our control, I guess, and out of control, escalating costs could eat into the Student Opportunity Act benefits we receive. Going into this year, I think, because every year since 2016, I've been asking, where are we in terms of where we were before that series of layoffs? And I think going into this year, we were finally down to like within single digits of recouping those positions. So based on what you're saying with the out of our control cost increases, there's a chance that while with the typical staff turnover year to year, we could finally recover all of those positions that were lost in 2016 going into 2017. We may not recover as many positions, or we may not finally be above those levels because of the increase in out-of-district costs and, more importantly, health insurance costs. So I think that's something I've got that correct, right? So I think that's an important consideration to make, that every year we, not because of suddenly available money, just by a matter of regular staff turnover in terms of, 2 or 3 people retire, we can then hire 4 or 5 people, giving us a couple of additional new spots all across the district. that may not be as fruitful for us, even with the Opportunities Act, as it has been in the past. So it's something to, unfortunately, keep in the back of our minds.
Well, just to close out, I mean, I think part of the challenge that prior to this legislation that exists today, is that we are spending in two targeted areas more than what the state formula thinks we should spend because of the escalating costs. So these increases may target those two primary areas, the special education services, maybe particularly out-of-district tuition, and health costs, so that hopefully other funding that had been previously needed to cover the difference may now finally be used for other things. So I look at it, I guess I'm a little more half full, though I am aware that these threats can continue to kind of change that narrative a little bit. But that's ultimately what's supposed to be fixed. So, if we were, I thought it was close to 10 million itself was primarily in those two targeted areas. If over the 7 years, the state actually made up that difference, it would allow us to use the other funding the way we would expect to want to use it, and then whatever else the city can provide.
Correct, but if those costs
Get us there.
continue to escalate at the rates that they do,
Then it's going to
then
have
we're
a negative
falling,
effect.
we're not
Yeah.
actually getting anywhere.
Then I agree. And then the goal of this legislation would not be met.
Right.
Yep.
All right, so just in terms of next steps, again, we anticipate the governor's budget in January. That should reflect the Student Opportunity Act, so it'll be a big moment for us to see what that number actually is. Then we'll be back in March with our proposal, and then in April, we turn it over to you.
Mr. Larson? In the governor's budget in January, do you expect to actually find out now what the new formula is? I mean, we know that the past formula that's 20-some-odd years old is archaic, but will we find out what the new assumptions are for health insurance increases, special ed increased
Yes.
costs, and because I haven't seen the new assumptions
Right.
published anywhere yet.
The
So I've been,
adjustments to the formula, yeah, that's all still behind the curtain.
yeah, I'm encouraged that they're actually looking at them, but without knowing the new assumptions that they've put into a bad formula, I'm trying to stay cautiously optimistic, I guess.
Yeah.
Because, we know what our increases are, but we don't know what the assumptions are that they're putting into the new formula.
Correct.
The
That should all be made visible to us when they announce the number. And another thing I should mention that's different for this coming year than what we've experienced in the past is because of the Student Opportunity Act, I think we should assume that the number we get in January is the number we're getting. Unlike past years where the governor came out with his number and then we went through this whole dance that ended, like this last year, we didn't get the number till July. That reality is not going to be the same. I don't think we should anticipate that the House or the Senate is going to increase the number the way they have in past years. So, we can safely plan with that January number, which, if it's a good number, great. If it's not, I mean, that's regrettable. But from a stability standpoint, I think that does improve things.
Ms. Larson? Just to follow up. So do you envision the new formula to break out ELL, to break out special ed students in such a way? I mean, because it's really what the act is designed for, is to address districts who have high ELL students and high special ed costs.
No, in January, we'll just get a number. But I do believe at some point they'll, and I don't know why they wouldn't do it then, because they will have it then. I mean, they're telling us now that they can't even tell us what assumptions they're using because they're still working on it. But I assume that just like they do now, they'll let us know how
Right.
they've cooked that number.
Right, but from what they've been saying, the numbers are basically to address
Yes.
districts
Yeah,
that have been.
we know what the
just
fixes were.
Districts that have been
Yep.
handicapped by those two issues, so I guess I'm kind of wondering how they're going to
It was
inform
more
us
than-
as to,
was
how
more
they're,
than
how
two.
they're addressing that.
It was-
Sort of just giving us a number.
Yeah, it was the whole commission recommendation. I'm not sure they met the levels that the commission recommended, but they addressed all of the areas that the commission addressed. And we will get a table at some point showing populations by these categories and then their foundation budget per student.
Oh, okay. So we will be able to back into.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That was my question. So.
So my understanding of it is, particularly with special ed, they're working off of an assumption percentage of the district as a whole. So you won't have that targeted aid in that area. However, there is a per pupil for ELL,
Yep.
targeted by their grade level. So as they move, I think they emphasize high school more so sometimes than
Right.
elementary. There is a per pupil for, I believe, with low income, and that's like a targeted figure that they're phasing in. And then for health insurance, and this is kind of one reason to be hopeful, every year the adjustment for health insurance should reflect somewhat market rates, but I take that with a grain of salt. I mean, ask any regional school about state reimbursement for transportation is always at 75%. So what they'll say is the market's 3% when we really have 8%. So there's going to be those adjustments, but the targeted piece is like what you're talking about. We know we have X number of students with who are categorized as ELL or a low income. Those will see like specific dollars, but the assumption for special education is a percentage. And then I think the only other benefit would just be what we get in terms of circuit breaker funds.
Right.
That amount I think total went up, correct?
Yes.
So that's the other area.
And reimbursement for out-of-district transportation.
Mr. Storrs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With low income, just to go off Mr. Quinn's point, if I understand, that's based on low or reduced, a free or reduced lunch, correct?
Yeah.
And I know in the recent years past, we had a concerted effort to make sure those who were eligible were on the program. How do we, do we feel like we're at 100% of that or relatively close? Those who are eligible are?
We have pushed to have families fill out applications, and I believe we certainly are covering more of our families with needs than we have in the past. Our numbers are up. We're sort of the high 40s now, where before we were low 40s. But it does not reflect 100% what the situation is. We still have lots of families who are reticent to filling out the apps, and that's a shame. We see it all the time in accumulation of debt for the lunch program with students.
And it's a shame because it not only affects them, but then it also affects the numbers that we're talking about now.
District, yeah.
Mr. Quinn?
One of the benefits though to that point is that they've broadened the indicators for what qualifies people. So you just be, if you fill out the form for free and reduced lunch qualify. They're also looking at, just for one example of if you're a family that's on the Medicaid enrollment, that's one way to link it up. And I think I'm not sure if it's with SNAP, but the state has wisely restructured that so that if you can qualify in a lot of different ways.
Much more inclusive.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No.
That concludes my report.
Great, thank you. Next, we have our consent agenda. Motion to accept 10 $10 Dunkin' gift cards from the Fuller Hospital to Attleboro High School.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a $25 donation from Donna and Michael Carlino in memory of Mike Carlino for the Best Buddies program. In memory of Nick Carlino for the Best Buddies program at the high school.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a $875 donation from Kathleen Vital in memory of Nick Carlino for the Best Buddies program at the Attleboro High School.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a $1,000 donation from Kirk Snyder and Elise Copley in memory of Nick Carlino for the Best Buddies program at the high school.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a $500 check donation from Tracy Hegney to the cross-country program at the high school.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a $100 donation from the National Association of Letter Carriers, aka NALC, Local 742, in memory of Nick Carlino for the Best Buddies program at the high school.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a check in the amount of $1,886.64 from the Stop and Shop Rewards Program to the Attleboro High School Gifts and Donation Line.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept a donation of $500 from the Peter Thatcher Elementary and ELC PTO to Thatcher for technology purposes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to accept the contractual obligation in the amount of $13,918.20 from Life Touch as broken down in the December 6th memorandum from myself.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve an overnight international field trip proposal for approximately 5 grade 10 through 12 students to attend the Mass All-State Festival in Boston on March 5th through 7th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve an overnight international field trip proposal for approximately 51 grade 9 through 12 students to perform in the National Memorial Day Parade on May 23rd to 25th, 2020 in Washington, D.C.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Geddes?
I just want to say congratulations to those that were asked to participate. That's a huge honor.
Thank you. Next, we have our subcommittee reports for tonight, starting with policy and personnel. Mrs. Scales?
Thank you. At our meeting, we went over the final items in Section B and Section D. There are not a lot of major edits, so we'll go through them quickly. Motion to approve policy BDFA, school councils as edited.
So moved.
Second. Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to remove Attleboro's policy exhibit BDFAE1, election procedure for school councils, and place it in the administrative binder.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve policy exhibit BDFAE1, school improvement plans as edited.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve policy exhibit BDFAE2, conduct of school council business as edited.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to remove policy BDFAA, school improvement plan from the policy binder.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to note the review date of policy BDFB, Career and Technical Advisory Committee.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to remove policy exhibit BECE1, recommended motions for executive session.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve policy BEDG, minutes as edited.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to note the review date of policy BEE, special procedures for conducting hearings.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the edits of BGD, school committee review of procedures to align with mask.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the edits to policy BHC, school committee staff communications.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the edits to policy BIA, new school committee member orientation to align with mask.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the edits to policy BIAA, school committee transition protocol.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to note the review date of policy BID, school committee member compensation and expenses.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the edits to policy DD, funding proposals and applications.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to remove policy exhibit DDE1 from the policy binder.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the edits to policy DJA, purchasing authority.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Motion to approve the edits to policy DJE, procurement requirements.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And motion to approve the edits to policy DK, payment procedures.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. So with that, we only we went through the entire policy binder, so I want to thank my subcommittee, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Storrs, and Mr. Quinn. We only have two, I left them two to do. And I want to thank Ms. Nelson for all her hard work, and to Ms. Regan and to Ms. Singer for just keeping us going the whole time. Everybody did a really great job, and I will never look at a bat, mini horse, robot, or wolf bred dog ever the same again.
Mrs. Stewart?
Now I'm gonna try to embarrass you.
Oh, I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna do like
No,
a
I'm gonna
motion or
embarrass
something,
you.
because I
Now,
was
first,
gonna
do
really
wanna-
kill you.
Because we do have two members who are gonna be leaving after this meeting, so that were policy, so I'd like to thank Mr. Quinn for all his hard work, but especially Ms. Scales, what you've done over the last 4 years with the administration's help. Going through that entire policy binder, it's something else, so.
Absolutely.
Thank you for everything you've done.
Yes, I appreciate that. That's my report.
Thank you, Mrs. Scales. Finance and Budget, Mr. Larson?
Finance and Budget Subcommittee met on December 4th. Mr. Furtado took us through the monthly budget reports. We had a brief MSBA update. You heard the superintendent touch on most of the points that we talked about. We have two concerns in the financials. One Mr. Furtado has already talked about with the health insurance. We're continuing to track over budget. The other is transportation. We've got McKinney-Vento students and foster care students from the district that are, because the way you have to, when you get a new student, even though you're not going to have them for the whole year, you have to basically put them in the system, and you have to cut the purchase order as if they were going to be here until the end of June. So when we put all those orders in and you look at the exposure that you possibly have, even though you know that they all won't be here by the end of June, we have a cause for concern there. We're going to continue to monitor that, and we'll keep the full committee up to date as we're going through the year. We reviewed the letter that Mr. Furtado sent to City Hall, $95,000 worth of capital improvements that we've had to make, and a lot of this is just due to broken equipment, HVAC units, boilers that had to be retubed in the attempt to keep the buildings warm as the winter approaches. We had a discussion about the copier issue because we have that lease coming up in the end of April in 2020. So we'll update the committee as we get a little closer to that with what our recommendations are, as well as the lease on our minivans are up at the end of June 2020, so we'll have recommendations coming in the spring as to what our options are there going forward. We had one motion to bring forward to the full committee. We had an invoice from a prior year, so I'd entertain a motion to submit to City Hall of FY19 financial obligation in the amount of $14.55 that needs to be paid.
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion? I believe you all got the two pages worth of $14, so. Seeing nothing, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. That's the extent of our report. Thank you.
All right, so that concludes our subcommittee reports. Open forum, is there anyone who'd like to address the committee at open forum? No? We'll do other business now. Before I did, just want to, Mr. Storrs mentioned it, today is the last meeting of this school committee term. We are losing two members, Mr. Quinn and Mrs. Scales, who have been strong, active members of the committee for many years, and I personally want to thank them for all their hard work. I know they've been invaluable to me and the committee. I think the district has made significant strides and improvements over the past many years, and I don't think there's anyone other than our employees and administration that have had more of an impact in making those improvements than the two of you. So thank you both very much, and you certainly will be missed.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any business? Mr. Quinn?
I just want to take a moment to thank my colleagues for the time and investment that you've made to the district alongside me. And I also want to thank each of you for the things that you've taught me. I feel like I've learned a little or large something from each of you. I just want to take a minute to kind of go around and just say briefly just that impact that you made. Diane, you have brought an awareness of issues of identity, particularly those students who are most vulnerable in our community, that have greatly enhanced our policy and have made me a better school committee member. You advocate strongly for your ward and your people in Ward 1. And I just want to thank you for bringing those both and making me a better school committee member and a better administrator as a result of that. So I really appreciate that. Mr. Geddes, you have taught me what blue pride looks like over the course of a lifetime. Your reputation in AHS is legendary. But what I truly appreciate in working with you is your commitment to Attleboro Public Schools, both the present, you're always in the schools, in your role with BCC. The future, your tireless advocacy for the future Attleboro High School, and then also representing the past with your efforts to preserve the legacy of Attleboro Public Schools. You are the embodiment of Blue Pride. So thank you, Mr. Geddes.
Thank you.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
you have embodied what a learner's mindset looks like.
Thank you.
You have jumped in, you've asked excellent questions, and with each question, it's clear how much your knowledge and understanding of your role has grown. It's been a pleasure working with you. It's a pleasure learning from you, and I hope that you continue with your inquisitive nature, and I hope that I can embrace that as well. I'll get to you two in a minute. Mr. Larson.
Wow.
You have taught me both the economy of words. You embody brevity, but when you ask a question or when you speak, it speaks volumes, and that's something I know I need to learn as evidence right now. But on a personal level, what good parenting looks like. Your daughter, who has been a wonderful caretaker for my family, has just been wonderful, and that's something I'll take away. Mr. Storrs, your attention to detail, particularly within policy, is unparalleled. It's an area of, say, weakness for myself, but the amount of things that you catch, the insights that you bring, is really impressive. And additionally, with that comes the institutional knowledge and the ability to speak to the history of a lot of these policies. I think the committee is in good hands, knowing somebody who, like yourself, who's been here and seen the different evolutions of the school committee. Mr. Domenici, I have learned what it looks like to leap headfirst into a role as a school committee member. You hit the ground absolutely running. You embody what it means to show up, to be present, and to advocate. It's hard to think of an event for Attleboro Public Schools where you are not present, and also your advocacy at the state level for our schools, with the Foundation Budget Review Commission, and then even with the high school before you got on this committee. I've learned what it looks like to dive right into a new position. Mrs. Scales, from you I've learned authenticity. I always knew where you stood on things. I always knew I could get an honest, direct answer from you. I always knew that I'd get wisdom. And I've always appreciated, again, like Mrs. Sawyer, your tireless advocacy for some of the most vulnerable members of our community, and just the power with which you speak through your disposition has been something that I'll take away from me. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Chairman, it's been a pleasure serving alongside you. From you, I've learned what leadership looks like. You have been a tireless advocate for the schools. You have been somebody who's been approachable, who's thoughtful, who's credible, and I am grateful for having the opportunity to collaborate with you over the last 4 years. So thank you very much for serving as a model for what a school committee chair could be. In closing, just the administrative staff, I've spoken to all of you, but you are among the greatest people I've had the pleasure to work with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just say ditto?
I think that's perfect.
You just stole the brevity award from Mr. Larson.
Anyone else? With all that being said, we're not quite done yet, so I will entertain a motion to enter into executive session because the Attleboro School Committee negotiating Negotiations Subcommittee will convene an executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, 2 and 3, to discuss strategy with respect to negotiations with union personnel and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Domenici?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Mr. Torres?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Withers, yes. Mrs. Scales?
I feel like saying no.
Doesn't matter now.
Again, no.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn? Mr. Geddes?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Okay. We'll take a 2-minute recess.
We are not reconvening in public
We
session.
are not, thank you. We are not reconvening in public session. And then you can feel free to stay because it'll impact next.
You wrote down the sheet and said yes.
What's that?
I said I had already written down the sheet and said yes.
Habit.
Just to mess things
How'd it feel?